In a defiant and highly significant New Year message delivered to the Russian nation as the world entered 2026, former President Dmitry Medvedev declared that victory for Russia is near. Medvedev, who currently serves as the deputy chairman of the Security Council, hailed the past year of 2025 as a pivotal turning point for the Russian Federation. He spoke with deep emotion about the country's history, drawing a direct and powerful line between the soldiers fighting today and the heroes of the great patriotic war 80 years ago. In his address, he emphasized that the current conflict is not just a military operation, but a civilizational struggle for truth, sovereignty, and the survival of the Russian world. Medvedev praised the courage of the soldiers on the front lines and thanked the workers in the rear who have kept the economy running despite heavy sanctions. He asserted that Russia's true strength comes from its unbroken historical memory and its spiritual foundations, which he claimed are stronger than any external pressure from the United States, NATO, or the European Union. He framed the war as a necessary battle to protect Russia's future and stated that the countries would continue to move forward regardless of isolation attempts or Western coercion. This message set a tone of absolute determination as the war approaches its fourth year, signaling to both domestic and international audience that the Kremlin has no intention of backing down. The speech was widely broadcast and analyzed, serving as a reminder that the leadership in Moscow views the current geopolitical situation as a fundamental test of national endurance. Tensions reached a boiling point immediately following the New Year celebrations due to a massive security incident involving an alleged drone attack on President Vladimir Putin's state residence. Russian officials reported that their air defense systems intercepted 91 long-range drones over the Novgorod region, which they claimed were targeting the facility where the president was staying. Moscow labeled this incident a terrorist attack and directly accused Ukraine of attempting to assassinate the Russian leader. The Kremlin insisted that the strike was aimed at derailing potential peace talks and provoking a violent response. Ukrainian officials, including President Volodymyr Zelensky, flatly denied the accusation, calling them fabricated stories designed to justify further aggressions by Russian forces. He stated that no evidence was presented to support the claim that Ukrainian drones were involved. Despite the lack of reported damage or casualties at the residence, the political consequences were immediate and severe. The episode triggered global concerns that Russia might retaliate directly against Ukrainian leadership, raising fear of a dangerous escalation. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko also weighed in on the situation, questioning the logic behind such an attack. He suggested that there was no military point in launching a strike on the residence and argued that it might reflect a breakdown in Ukraine's command structure or a deliberate attempt by others to worsen the conflict. This event has hardened Russia's negotiating stance and created a fragile atmosphere as diplomats scrambles to prevent the war from spiraling out of control. In a move that signals a significant shift in military posture, Russia has placed its new Oreshnik missile systems on combat duty in neighboring Belarus. This decision comes just days after the alleged drone attack on President Putin's residence and serves as a stern warning to NATO and European nations. The Russian Defense Ministry released official footage showing missile crews taking up their positions during a formal ceremony, confirming that the nuclear-capable hypersonic missile systems is now active. This deployment places a large part of Europe within striking distance of Russian missiles and is seen by analysts as a direct message of deterrence. The Oreshnik system is a medium-range ballistic weapon that is difficult to intercept, and its presence in Belarus complicates the security landscape for the entire region. Russian officials stated that the drone incident would not go unanswered and that their response would not be diplomatic. The placement of these advanced weapons close to NATO's eastern borders indicates that Moscow is ready to escalate its military capabilities if it feels threatened. This development has alarmed Western leaders, who viewed it as a dangerous step that increased the risk of a wider conflict. The move is also interpreted as a way for Russia to strengthen its strategic positions while peace talks remain stalled, ensuring that it negotiates from a position of power. On the battlefields of Ukraine, the fighting remains intense and brutal as Russian forces report new territorial gains. The Russian military announced that its troops had captured the city of Dmitrov after repelling several counterattacks and conducting house-to-house clearing operations. They described the Ukrainian force in the area as encircled and surrendering during the assault. In a separate operation, Russian airborne units claimed to have liberated Novgorod, raising their flags on multi-story buildings to mark their control. These claims could not be independently verified immediately, but they reflect the ongoing offensive pressure being applied by Moscow. To sustain its military efforts, President Vladimir Putin signed a sweeping executive decree that transitions Russia to a system of year-round military conscription for the calendar year of 2026. This new order sets a target of calling up 261,000 men aged 18 to 30 for compulsory service. The draft boards will now operate continuously from January 1st to December 31st, a significant change from the traditional seasonal draft model. Analysts suggest that this move signals the Kremlin's intent to institutionalize a permanent war economy. Additionally, there have been reports of deadly attacks on civilians. In the village of Korli, in the Russian-held Kherson region, a drone attack struck a hotel and cafe where people were celebrating the New Year, killing more than 20 people. In Ukraine's Odessa region, Russian strikes damaged energy infrastructure, leaving 170,000 people without electricity and injuring civilians. These events highlight the devastating human cost of the war as it continues to grind on. Diplomatic efforts to end the conflict have intensified, with the new administration in the United States taking a leading role. President Donald Trump, who is now officially in office, has been pushing for peace framework that he described as very close to being finalized. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk expressed optimism that a breakthrough could occur in the coming weeks after holding talks with NATO leaders and U.S. officials. Tusk revealed that, for the first time, the deployment of American troops to Ukrainian soil is being discussed as part of post-ceasefire security guarantees. This proposal involved U.S. force potentially being stationed along future contact lines to ensure stability. However, this suggestion has triggered a furious response from Moscow. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov issued a stark ultimatum, warning that any European or American troops deployed to Ukraine would be considered legitimate targets for the Russian military. Lavrov stated that such a move would be seen as a direct act of military confrontation rather than a security guarantee. This aggressive rhetoric from Russia puts immense pressure on Western leaders to navigate the crisis carefully, while Tusk and Trump are working toward a deal that might require Ukraine to make difficult territorial compromise. The threat of direct conflict between Russian and NATO forces remains a major obstacle. The diplomatic landscape is rapidly deteriorating as both sides draw red lines, making the prospect of peace both tantalizingly close and dangerously fragile. Within the European Union, unity regarding the war is showing signs of serious fracture. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico delivered a blistering New Year address that shocked many of his European allies. In his speech, Fico launched a sharp attack on the EU leadership, accusing them of blind obedience and moral bankruptcy in their handling of the Ukraine war. He stated that he was appalled by the ease with which European leaders discussed the death of soldiers and civilians, describing the killing of both Ukrainians and Russians as senseless. Fico called for an end to military support for Ukraine and urged a return to diplomatic efforts, positioning himself against the mainstream Western consensus. His remarks were seen as openly pro-Russia by critics and have reignited tensions within the NATO bloc. Fico declared that Slovakia would no longer follow policies that prioritize geopolitical interests over human lives and emphasized the need for sovereignty and peaceful coexistence. This divergence in opinion highlights the growing political polarization in Europe as the war drags on. Fico's comments reflect awareness with a conflict that is spreading among some populations in Central Europe. His stance challenges the unity that has been a hallmark of the Western response to Russia's invasion, suggesting that keeping the coalition together will become increasingly difficult for the U.S. administration and major European powers in the year ahead. Beyond the borders of Europe, global instability is rising as other flashpoints flare up in response to the changing geopolitical order. In the Middle East, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian declared that his country is effectively in a full-scale war with the United States, Israel, and Europe. Although not a formal declaration of kinetic hostilities, he describes the current pressure on Tehran as more complex than the Iran-Iraq war of the 1980s. This statement came after President Donald Trump warned that the U.S. would launch powerful military strikes if Iran attempted to rebuild its nuclear program. Tensions were further inflamed by Iran's launch of 3 satellites using a Russian rocket, a move that Western officials view as a cover for developing ballistic missile technology. Meanwhile, in Asia, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un toured a new factory producing multiple rocket launchers, praising their ability to destroy enemies. The visit followed tests of long-range cruise missile, signaling that Pyongyang is ramping up its combat readiness. In the Western Hemisphere, the CIA conducted a secret drone strike on a port facility in Venezuela, targeting a drug trafficking hub linked to the Tren de Aragua gang. This was the first known U.S. strike inside Venezuela and indicate a more aggressive stance from Washington in its own neighborhood. Finally, Chinese President Xi Jinping used his New Year address to reiterate that the reunification of Taiwan is unstoppable, further asserting Beijing's confidence despite economic challenges. These simultaneous crises demonstrates that the conflict in Ukraine is just one part of a broader, interconnected struggle for global power and influence that is reshaping the world map in 2026. If you have made it this far, congratulations, you have unlocked the truth. I want to ask you a quick question though. With the deployment of nuclear-capable Oreshnik missile to Belarus and the explicit threat from Foreign Minister Lavrov to target any Western troops in Ukraine, do you believe the proposed peace plan involving U.S. security guarantees is a viable path to ending the war? Or does it risk triggering a direct World War III scenario between NATO and Russia? And why? Join the debate. We want to hear your insightful opinion on where this is all heading in our community. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I appreciate your support. Thank you for being a part of this journey. Like the video, share this video with friends and family, hit the notification bell, and most importantly, subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one.